EMP, or electromagnetic pulse, comes in three different pulse types. We refer to it as E1, E2, or E3. E1 and E2 happen to be, generally speaking, from man-made sources. E3 pulses generally come from nature, and primarily solar flares, although there's some magnetic activity that goes on within the Earth itself that can create EMP. So when you're looking at EMP from the perspective of E1 and E2, what you have typically there are very short-term but intense pulses. These can be hundreds of thousands of volts per square millimeter. So we're talking very large sums of energy coming in and having some effect on the system. The E3 impulse is a little bit different in that it is a larger, what we call a larger wavelength. And the damage that it causes is from a different perspective than E1 and E2. So the E1, E2 pulses typically tend to do their damage within seconds, at literally nanoseconds or milliseconds. Just boom, it comes, and then things get disrupted. Primarily what gets affected the most are the low voltage applications that we didn't have prior to really 1970 and 1960s. So anything that runs on 5 or 12 volts is what's going to be affected. Higher voltage materials, higher voltage machines tend not to be as affected by E1, E2 pulses. E3 pulses, on the other hand, can be extremely damaging to not just simply low voltage, but even high voltage sources. The reason for this is that we have a lot of our electrical grid system connected through towers and primarily underground systems. These underground wires act like an antenna. And like all antennas, they tend to accentuate signals and make them stronger. So while these wavelengths are measured in terms of seconds, like several seconds, as opposed to, say, E1 and E2 pulses, which can be a millionth of a second in terms of what we're measuring there, those larger impulses get amplified to the system. And so not only can they create damage at the transfer circuits of most of grids, which are low voltage, but they can also have an impact on the higher voltage connecting wires, as well as the transmission stations with regards to the resistors that are used and the components that they're using, because this signal is so amplified. So part of this problem that we've had with EMP was that, frankly, prior to the 70s, whether it was dangerous or not to us as human beings was an open question and not really well researched. There's no question, though, that since we now so depend on low voltage systems, but just take computers as an example, even the computer systems in your cars would be affected. Now it becomes a very big way to take a look at how to survive one of these events. So the way that we've designed this, well, let me back up a second. So you can go ahead and actually address these systems under a concentrated, cohesive, say, system that is centralized, but it's not easy and it's not cheap. On a decentralized system, there's a couple of new technologies out that can address with regards to EMP items, both the systems that we make, but also systems for decentralized electrical systems, decentralized systems that are providing energy to homes. And so the homes now can also pretty effectively and quite inexpensively be protected against EMP as well. Because if you have a system, say that's a decentralized system, and it's working fine, and you get an EMP pulse and it runs through your main service from the utility, all of the items that are plugged into your plug in the house are going to get fried from potentially affected by the EMP signal as well. So we actually put in EMP signals into the main panel. We will also have them put into customers' automobiles, which are very easy to do and very inexpensive to do, so that it doesn't affect the ignition system in the event of an EMP. And then we also make sure that we have our systems not only protected on what we call the AC range, but we also protect them on the DC range. So those items, for example, that can get very much affected on decentralized systems are, if you have solar, for example, the wiring can be affected in the solar. Inside the inverter systems, they have smaller systems or voltages in there that could be affected. So they need to be protected as well. Interestingly enough, batteries were not at one point a big concern because batteries had very thick cables and EMP generally did not affect them. However, now with the new batteries, such as lithium, that have battery management systems, they do operate off a low voltage. So now we have to figure out a way to protect them as well. So in general, the idea of protecting EMP on a centralized system versus a decentralized system is that, and it goes back to the main premise, which is if the EMP works, and generally it does, but there's never any guarantee. If you don't have a redundant system set up in a centralized system, then all it takes is one time the system breaks down, the safety system, and now you're back to the same issues of, well, what got ruined? And in the case of an EMP event, it could be catastrophic. I mean, it could be where nothing will work again. You have the same issue with a decentralized system, except you have a lot more systems out there to rebut that kind of an attack if it happens.